Imagine a medieval battlefield. The thunderous tramp of hundreds of feet, the clash of metal, and the tense silence before the storm. The warriors emerge not only with swords and spears, in their hands are instruments that changed the very nature of battle. This is more than just weaponry. These are tools created to overcome the most reliable defense of the era. Today, we will tell you about 10 types of medieval weapons that literally rewrote the rules of war. In the Middle Ages, the outcome of battles depended not only on the courage of knights encased in shining armor. Victory was brought by inventors, masters of the forge who turned metal into formidable symbols of power. Autumn in France. An October morning, 1415. Hundreds of years of wars between England and France have led the armies to the small village of Agincourt. The French army seemed invincible, tens of thousands of knights, many in the richest Milanese armor, gleaming with silver and gold. Horses were covered with caparisons, and helmets were adorned with feathers and the coats of arms of noble families. The strength and pride of the French nobility had gathered in one place. And opposite them, the English. They were outnumbered several times over. Tired after a long march, exhausted by disease and rain. But they had what the French lacked: discipline, the experience of their archers, and the simple but reliable weapons of their infantry. When the battle began, the weather decided everything. The rains had turned the field into a viscous swamp. The French cavalry, accustomed to swift charges, got bogged down in the mud. The horses lost speed, and the knights found their movements restricted. Their power, their main advantage, a frontal assault, proved useless. It was at this moment that the foot soldiers entered the fray. In their hands were war hammers. This weapon looked simple, a long wooden shaft with a heavy iron block at the end. On one side, a flat striking face, on the other, a sharp spike. The hammer did not try to cut through metal, it used physics, concentrating the force of the blow into a single point. Where swords slid off steel, the hammer turned helmets into ringing bells and sturdy cuirasses into cages in which a knight lost all advantage. One precise strike could disable even the wealthiest warrior. Archaeologists have found hammers weighing over 3 kilograms. Imagine a soldier swinging such a weapon on a long handle. It was a true pendulum of destructive force. And most importantly, it was simple. There was no need for years of fencing training, as with a sword. All that was required was strength and determination. Thus, the war hammer became the weapon of equals. It destroyed the main advantage of the nobility, their expensive armor. Simple foot soldiers could stop those who considered themselves invincible. The outcome of Agincourt became symbolic. The proud French cavalry was helpless against English discipline and simple yet effective weaponry. From that day on, it became clear that shining armor no longer guaranteed victory. The war hammer went down in history as the primary weapon against knights in plate armor. When the war hammer proved its strength against knightly armor, war presented Europe with a new problem. Knights learned to hold formation, hide behind shields, and defend themselves collectively. And then, a weapon appeared on the battlefield that broke all conventional methods of defense: the chain flail. Imagine a wooden handle in the hands of a peasant, a short chain attached to it, and at the end, a heavy iron ball, sometimes smooth, sometimes covered with spikes. Once this weapon was swung, the ball began to live a life of its own. It flew where the enemy did not expect a blow. A shield, which reliably protected against a sword or spear, suddenly became useless. The spiked ball could wrap around it, strike from the side or above, fly over the edge, and reach its target. Even experienced knights in full armor were at a loss when an unpredictable iron mass spun before them. The flail became particularly famous during the Hussite Wars in Bohemia in the 15th century. The rebels, common townspeople and peasants, lacked the means to arm themselves with expensive weapons. They took ordinary agricultural flails used for threshing grain and converted them into weapons. What had served the harvest yesterday became a terrible enemy of the knightly nobility today. Historians tell of how the blows of the flails rained down on horsemen from above, breaking formations and sowing chaos in the orderly ranks of the enemy. And sometimes the sound alone was unnerving. Some of the balls had hollow chambers and would whistle when swung. Imagine that ominous whistle spreading over the battlefield, and no one knowing where the blow would come from. But the flail was dangerous not only for enemies but also for its wielders. The chain obeyed the laws of inertia, not the person. Many novices struck themselves with their own weapon during their first training sessions. Yet, whoever mastered the flail became a fearsome force. Neither armor nor shield could guarantee protection. The flail entered history as the weapon of unpredictability. It made common people a threat to armored knights and became a symbol of how ingenuity and daring could change the rules of war. If the war hammer was a weapon of force and the flail a weapon of chaos, then the Godendag became the embodiment of crude but brilliant simplicity. Flanders, 15th century. A time when common townspeople and peasants increasingly stood shoulder to shoulder with professional soldiers. They had neither rich armor nor expensive swords, but they found their own weapon. Imagine, a long club made of sturdy wood, reinforced with iron. At the end, just a single sharp spike. Nothing superfluous, no frills. But therein lay its strength. The Godendag proved surprisingly effective against armored cavalry. When knights charged, infantrymen armed with these clubs formed a line. A blow from the heavy shaft would knock a rider from his horse, and the iron spike would pierce his protection. Even the most expensive armor could not save one from raw, focused force. It is no coincidence that the name of the weapon itself sounded ironic. Godendag meant good day in the local dialect. But on the battlefield, this greeting spelled doom for any horseman. Its simplicity made the Godendag a mass weapon. It could be made quickly and cheaply, wood, iron, and the weapon was ready. A sword required years of training and masterful smithing. A Godendag required only determination. That is why it was used to arm militias in Flanders, Germany, and the Netherlands. Historians believe that such people's clubs were one of the key factors that allowed common infantry to stand against the nobility. On the battlefields of the 15th and 16th centuries, the Godendag became a symbol that victory could be won not only by knights, but also by ordinary people armed with the simplest of weapons. After the brute force of the war hammer, the chaotic strikes of the flail, and the simple club of the Godendag, warfare in Europe took the next step. Infantry needed a weapon that could not only defend but also break knightly formations, thwart cavalry charges, and hold the battlefield. Thus, the halberd was born. Imagine a formation of Swiss pikemen in the 15th century. They stand shoulder to shoulder, forming a dense wall of long shafts. At the ends are not simple spears. The halberd combined three types of weapons at once, a sharp point like a spear, a wide axe-like blade, and a curved hook on the reverse side. When knightly cavalry tried to break through the formation, the spear point stopped the horses, the heavy blade bit into armor, and the hook pulled the rider from his saddle. With a single weapon, a soldier could stab, chop, and pull the enemy down. Chronicles of the 15th century describe battles where Swiss units with halberds crushed cavalry previously considered invincible. The secret was in discipline and a weapon that turned a formation of foot soldiers into an impenetrable wall. The halberd quickly became a symbol of the infantry. It was used not only in Switzerland but spread throughout Europe, from the German lands to France and Italy. And if the fate of a battle was once decided by a knightly charge, it was now decided by a wall of halberds, behind which stood simple but well-trained soldiers. Interestingly, over time, the halberd moved beyond the battlefield. During the Renaissance, it began to be used as a ceremonial weapon, decorated with gilding and carvings. Even today in the Vatican, the Swiss Guards protect the Pope with halberds, a symbol of discipline and tradition. But on the battlefields of the 15th to 16th centuries, it was not an ornament but a real nightmare for knights. The halberd definitively showed that infantry had become an equal force to cavalry. If the halberd changed warfare at close range, the crossbow made even a common foot soldier standing far behind dangerous. It was feared, admired, and even an attempt was made to ban it. The crossbow looked unremarkable, a short wooden or metal stock, a strong steel bow attached to it, and a string drawn back with a hook, a windlass, or even a special lever. The bolt, a short and heavy arrow, flew with such force that it could pierce knightly armor. In the 12th century, the crossbow gained fame on the fields of the Crusades. During the Battle of Arsuf in 1191, chroniclers wrote about how crossbowmen from Genoa supported the knights of Richard the Lionheart. Their bolts struck enemies at a distance where a regular archer's shot would have lost its power. By the 14th to 15th centuries, the crossbow had become the main weapon of city garrisons and mercenaries throughout Europe. The French and Spanish hired entire companies of crossbowmen, and in Italy, there were even special guilds of craftsmen who created complex winding mechanisms. Interestingly, the Church once tried to ban crossbows. At the Second Lateran Council in 1139, Pope Innocent II declared this weapon unworthy of a Christian, as it allowed a common man to slay a knight, the symbol of the military elite. But, as often happens, the ban only highlighted the weapon's power. Crossbows continued to be used because they were too effective. On the battlefield, the crossbow decided much. Its bolts pierced shields, penetrated mail and plate, and forced enemies to take cover. English archers prided themselves on their rate of fire, but crossbowmen triumphed with power and penetration. Over time, mechanical crossbows with windlasses and winches even appeared, capable of firing bolts with a force comparable to a modern rifle. The crossbow became a weapon that changed the balance between the nobility and common soldiers. Now, even a peasant or a townsman could strike down a wealthy knight in expensive armor from a distance. If the crossbow gave power at a distance, the mace demonstrated might in close combat. It looked simple, a short wooden or metal shaft with a weighted head at the end. Sometimes it was a smooth ball, sometimes it had flanges, ribs, or spikes to concentrate the force of the blow. Its history goes deep into antiquity, but it was in the Middle Ages that the mace acquired special significance. On the battlefield, it was incredibly practical. Unlike a sword, it did not require a sharp blade. The mace did not cut, it broke. The impact was concentrated on a small area, and even the strongest armor could not save the wearer from the internal trauma. Imagine a knight in plate armor. His protection could deflect a blade or an arrow, but a heavy blow from a mace would cause the armor to dent, and the body inside would receive a powerful shock. The mace was especially effective against mounted warriors. Short and fast, it allowed for attacks in a tight melee where there was no room to swing a sword. Interestingly, in many countries, the mace also became a symbol of authority. In Poland and Rus, military leaders carried it as a sign of command, hence the expression, to take the mace, meaning, to take power. In Europe, richly decorated maces were presented to commanders and nobles as a sign of their status. Archaeologists find dozens of variations of this weapon, from simple wooden ones with metal plates to fully cast steel ones weighing over 1.5 kilograms. If the mace impressed with its simplicity, the flamberge captivated with its beauty and intimidating appearance. This sword was impossible to confuse with any other. Its blade was not straight like a conventional weapon but was shaped in waves, like tongues of flame. Hence its name, flamberge, which translates to flaming sword. But the wavy shape was not just for aesthetics. When a flamberge clashed with another blade, the impact did not slide straight, the steel vibrated, causing a strong recoil. It felt to the opponent as if their own weapon was trembling in their hands, which disrupted the rhythm of the fight. Furthermore, this shape inflicted more ragged and painful wounds on unprotected areas. Flanders, 15th century. A time when common townspeople and peasants increasingly stood shoulder to shoulder with professional soldiers. They had neither rich armor nor expensive swords, but they found their own weapon. But perhaps its main feature was the impression it made. The very sight of a flamberge had a psychological effect on enemies. The wavy blade, glinting in the sunlight, created the effect of a real flame in the warrior's hands. Historians believe that this sword was often used by commanders or the best fighters. Their role was not only to fight but also to inspire fear and respect. The flamberge became a symbol of the lanzknecht mercenaries in Germany and Switzerland in the 16th century. Many of them carried such swords as a sign of special skill. Some surviving examples reach 2 meters in length and look more like works of art than weapons. Thus, the flamberge revealed another side of the Middle Ages. War was not only a struggle of strength but also a game on the psychological field. Upon seeing a flaming sword in the hands of an opponent, many would reconsider whether to continue the fight. If the flamberge inspired fear with the sight of its flaming blade, the longbow instilled terror even before close combat began. It allowed an army to strike from a distance, turning the battlefield into a rain of arrows. Imagine a 14th-century English archer. In his hands is a bow nearly as tall as he is, about 2 meters long, carved from yew. The string is drawn with an effort comparable to hundreds of kilograms of force. To master such a weapon required years of training. Skeletons of archers found by archaeologists show deformities in the bones of their shoulders and backs from the constant strain. The longbow became a formidable symbol of the 100 Years' War. In 1346, at the Battle of Crécy, and later at the famous Battle of Agincourt in 1415, it was the arrows of English archers that stopped the French cavalry. Knights, accustomed to relying on their armor, found themselves under a hail of tens of thousands of arrows falling from the sky. Horses fell, formations broke, and the infantry finished what had been started. Each shot from a longbow could pierce mail and even plate armor at medium range. But the main strength was not in a single shot, but in massed fire. Hundreds of archers would release their arrows almost simultaneously, and the sky would darken as if from a swarm of locusts. Chroniclers described this moment as an iron rain. Interestingly, there were even special laws for archers. In 14th to 15th century England, every Sunday, men were required to practice archery. This was not a pastime but a state duty, for the fate of the country depended on this very weapon. The longbow became a symbol of how a simple but disciplined weapon could break the proud nobility. Where knights were accustomed to deciding the outcome of a battle in close combat, the English archers won before the enemy even reached their lines. If the longbow ruled the sky above the battlefield, siege engines were created for a different purpose, to crush walls. The Middle Ages was the era of castles. Every city, every fortress had walls, moats, and towers. And to achieve victory, it was necessary not only to defeat the army but also to take the fortress. Imagine an army at the walls of a city. Dozens of people are pulling ropes, tightening cables, and turning wheels. A huge wooden structure is rolled onto the field, a trebuchet. It looks like a giant seesaw, a long arm with a counterweight, ropes, and a huge sling for the projectile. A stone weighing hundreds of kilograms is placed in it. There is a crack of wood, the counterweight falls, and the stone block soars into the sky with a roar. A moment later, it smashes into the wall, leaving cracks. The trebuchet was the true king of siege art in the 14th century. His strength was so great that stone cannonballs pierced even thick walls. Sometimes, instead of stones, burning barrels of tar or even special shells were launched to cause confusion in the city and deterioration of the sanitary situation. Another fearsome weapon was the battering ram, a long log with an iron tip, suspended on chains inside a covered wooden shed. Soldiers would swing it back and forth, and with each blow, the gates would splinter until they fell. And to get over the walls, siege towers were built. Imagine a huge, mobile wooden house, covered with wet hides to protect it from fire. Warriors would push the tower to the walls, soldiers would climb ladders inside, and when the tower met the wall, a bridge would be lowered directly onto the ramparts. The hand-to-hand fight would begin. Siege engines were not only weapons of force but also symbols of patience and engineering genius. They were built over weeks, sometimes months. Every stone thrown, every blow of the ram was a step toward victory or defeat. Historians note that it was siege engines that made the armed conflicts of the Middle Ages so protracted. Sometimes a castle would hold out for years until its walls crumbled to dust. But they also became the reason for the emergence of new architecture, bastions and star fortresses that could withstand stones and fire. 14th century. For the first time on the fields of Europe, a sound rings out that warriors of the past had never known, the sound of a gunshot. The first cannons looked crude, short iron barrels loaded with gunpowder and stone cannonballs. But one shot was enough to breach a castle wall or sow panic. The noise, smoke, and fire had an effect that no knight could withstand. Following the cannons came arquebuses, the first handguns. Their lead bullets pierced even the most expensive armor. And then it became clear, the age of knights was over. Plate armor, for centuries considered impenetrable, had lost its significance. Gunpowder changed combat forever. Castles fell to cannonballs, armies were rebuilt, and along with them all the weapons of the Middle Ages, hammers, halberds, crossbows, became a thing of the past. This was the finale of an old era and the beginning of a new one, where the deciding factor was no longer steel, but gunpowder smoke. Medieval weapons were more than just metal and wood. The war hammer showed that no armor is invincible. The flail proved the power of chaos. The godendag became the weapon of the common people. The halberd elevated infantry above cavalry. The bow and crossbow turned the sky into a rain of arrows. Siege engines challenged stone walls. And finally, gunpowder changed everything, closing the age of knights and opening the way to a new world. These weapons were a reflection of their time, of ingenuity, fear, and struggle. And as we look at them in museums today, they remind us of a key truth: history is always decided not only by heroes, but also by the tools they hold in their hands.